All right, so we are live. Good morning, Elizabeth Segran. It's December 7th, Monday. We're very excited to have you here, and I'm happy that through Fair Trade Campaigns, I get a chance to speak to you about reflection and about your book, The Rocket Years. So I'm just going to give a short intro about Elizabeth, and we have huge thanks and appreciation from Fair Trade Campaigns for your involvement and for your constant input on our conferences. And you are a staff writer for Fast Company, and you write about social business and fashion and sustainability, and you have been involved for several years at the conferences speaking and just contributing your knowledge, and we're really excited to talk to you this morning about reflection.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor to be here and to be talking to you about my book.
All right, so I am going to start off with a few questions about reflection and then some following questions about looking forward with this year of 2020, but also with thinking about the rocket years and thinking about people in their 20s and even beyond your 20s. I think this book is so applicable to anyone who's reading it. So my first question for you is, what are some important questions to ask ourselves when reflecting on 2020 in particular?
Mm-hmm. I think that our 20s are such a crucial time. So just for a little bit of background, I'm the author of a new book called The Rocket Years: How Your 20s Launched the Rest of Your Life. And for 2 years, I delved into a lot of research as I was working on this book about the big decisions that we make in our 20s and how they play out throughout our lives. And I think before we delve into the craziness of 2020, I just think that our 20s are such a remarkable period in our lives. That's what attracted me to this topic, because it's the first time that we're sort of creating our own identities apart from our families. We have so much freedom in these years to go out and explore the world, meet new people. And all of these experiences and insights are just so crucial to helping us figure out who we really are and what we want from life. And I think that our 20s are just such a beautiful time because they're so full of chaos. They're so full of mistakes that end up being so valuable to helping us understand who we are. And I think that the most important thing, though, is that it's really important for us to not lose sight of the insights that we gather through these years. And from personal experience, as somebody who's now in my 30s, I know that it's so easy to go through our 20s and have all of these amazing experiences and not really file away the insights that we gather through all of these experiences. So I love that this whole conversation is on reflection, because I think that the way that we make the most of our 20s is to feel free to go out there and have all of these amazing experiences and really ponder, what we want from life. But I also think that it's really important to have moments where we file these insights away. And that might mean, if you're somebody who likes journaling and doing that kind of thing, it means, thinking about, what did you learn this year? What did you discover about a relationship? When things didn't work out, what did you learn in those moments, right? So I think that, having moments where you're filing that stuff away, if you're not a journaler, I'm not, I think it just means, spending time, maybe talking to people in your life, having moments where you can sort of process everything that you've experienced. Okay, and this brings me now to 2020, right? I think for many of us, it's been a very difficult and traumatic period, and particularly for those of you who are in your 20s now, because, I think a lot of people had expectations for what this year was going to be like. This was going to be the year that you graduated and made your mark on the world. This was going to be the year that you got into a relationship that you had been so desiring. This was going to be the year where you moved forward up the career ladder, and you were going to do all of these different things. And as it turned out, for so many of us, this has been a year where we haven't been able to do those things, right? And so when it comes to this question of reflection, here's a couple of things that I would say. First of all, what I learned when I was working on the book is that moments of crisis are so crucial to figuring all this stuff out in our lives. And that's true even when we're not in 2020. It's when that relationship doesn't work out that you figure out what it is that you really want in a relationship, right? It's when you decide that this particular career choice that you thought that you thought was going to be your dream job, when it turns out not to be your dream job. It's in figuring out what was that difference between what you had expected and what it ended up being. That is the insight that will be so crucial to your life, right? So this year, I think that what we can think about is, what were you disappointed about? Stop for a second and like kind of process that. And, a lot of us have felt a lot of sadness. I think it's worth spending a few moments to think about, okay, what was it that you felt like you lost, right? And why was that so important to you? And now that you know that, now that you realize that this is important to you, what can you now do in the next year, when things begin to open up, to propel yourself forward and make up for that lost time? I think that in some ways, it's hard to experience it in the moment when we're experiencing all of this loss and disappointment, but it is this loss and disappointment that is kind of a gift, right? Because if we're able to extract from those experiences an understanding of who we really are and what we really want from life, that is so important to helping us kind of get to the kind of life that we really want. So yes, delve into that disappointment. Think about it. What did you miss out on, and what does that help you understand about what you really, really, really want in your life?
Right, absolutely. I feel like during this time, it might seem like we've lost a lot, but we've gained precious time, and I feel like we've gained this opportunity to really reflect and think about things. I'm someone who needs to sit down and journal and really be authentic with myself, because sometimes it can be easy to say things in front of other people. But then once I've journaled and once I've kind of connected with myself, I'll go and I'll talk to someone and get advice and figure out what are some good next steps. So
Totally.
anyone who's watching might have a combination of those tools.
I think that journaling is it's so valuable, and I know so many people who do it, and there's so many interesting ways to do it now with like bullet journaling and so on. For me personally, the way that I'm able to work through a lot and really reflect is in conversations with people. And so I think as we get towards the end of the year, if that's the kind of thing that you enjoy doing, maybe set aside some time, or do a Zoom date with somebody that you really care about, or with a parent, and just kind of talk through the year with a specific goal of trying to figure out, what did you learn? What did you learn about yourself this year? And what can you do with that knowledge? How can you turn that into something that you can throw yourself into next year?
Thank you so much for that input. I think that's so great. Like just having a friend date, or a good connection with like your family member that you can just reflect on these things. That's so cool. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my next question. How do you think 2020 has affected those in their rocket years? We kind of went over this, but if there's anything specific, maybe if you want to touch on politics or economy, if not, that's okay. And then the second question, if you were writing the book during the pandemic, what, if anything, would be added or different?
It's interesting because in some ways, I actually think that the book is actually a really good fit for this moment. And that's partly because I was drawing on a lot of the experience of my generation, the millennials, who also experienced a moment of crisis, though it was a little bit different. For us, we came of age during the Great Recession. And I think that extended period of economic decline really impacted a lot of how we saw the world. And, in our 20s, in my 20s, there was a lot of anxiety around our careers. I know so many people who didn't really know what to do when the recession hit. So they went to law school, for instance, to wait out those years. And then when they came out on the job market, they were horrified to find out that there were no law jobs for a while. And so then they had to scramble. In my case, the experience that I talk about in the book is that I really wanted to be a professor of Indian literature. And I spent my 20s largely, in grad school, getting a PhD in Indian literature, and then spending a lot of time in India and in Indonesia, just really understanding the culture, all of that, so that I could get a job in academia, or at least adjacent to the field that I was passionate about. And then there were no jobs for me. The academic job market had collapsed. And I think that the main thing there is that, in our careers, what I know from all of the research is that, a common path is that a lot of us set out with these dreams of what we want to do. And for a range of reasons, often the dream job that we expect to have doesn't work out. And that sometimes happens because, we have a vision of what it is we want to do. And when we actually give it a go, we realize that it's not what we thought it was going to be, or that we're not actually that good at the thing that we thought we were going to do. But in other situations, it's just that things around us don't work out because there's a crisis, right? For us, it was the Great Recession. For this generation, it's going to be the pandemic. And I think the key is, what do you do when that happens? There are multiple paths you can take. You can give up and believe that the dream job doesn't exist, or think that you're going to settle. But I think that it's the people who actually are able to sort of continue believing that there is something out there that they can do that is meaningful and worthwhile and that is fulfilling. It's those people who continue pushing forward through those moments of crisis, and eventually, by the time they're in their mid-30s, end up feeling really satisfied with the work that they do. So there's a lot of data that shows that, that these kind of mid-20s career crises, they're common. And even though you feel totally isolated as you're going through it by yourself, it's actually common even during times when there's no crisis, right? And so I think our challenge during this time is to stop and think, okay, my plan A has not worked out. What was it about that career that I was attracted to? What was it that, that I really wanted to do? What are the deep passions that I have, or the qualities that I have inside myself that I think are, that I want to manifest in the world? And I think a lot of us often think that we're going to do a specific job title, right? Like, I want to be a professor, or I want to do, something very specific. Like, I want to, work in a nonprofit that focuses on fair trade. I think that the key is, once you've spent some time thinking about it, broaden it out a bit and think, how else can I do these things that I really enjoy doing? In my case, what ended up happening was, after several years of exploration and disappointment and feeling like things hadn't worked out, I realized that the thing that I really loved in academia was the writing. And I loved the conversations that I got to have with people and writing about it. And all of this led me to become a journalist. And now, this is not at all what I set out to do, but I love my work so much. And in so many ways, it is a manifestation of the same things that drew me to academia. So this is going to be a year of having to rethink what you're going to do with your future. And my advice is, take that time to mourn and be upset that it hasn't worked out. That is a deeply painful and emotional experience. And so let yourself have that experience, but then broaden your world and think about all of the different things that you can do. That's one aspect of the book that I think is actually still very relevant. And there's a lot more information in the career chapter in the book. The one other thing that I would say is that this has been a year of very weird social relationships. And our 20s are this really vital time in our life to expand our social network. Most people, their circle of friends is at their largest when they're 25. And that's because, they still have friends from their childhood, they have friends from college, and they have friends from the workplace. And as time goes on past 25, people's circle of friends tends to shrink and shrink and shrink. And so it's really important that you have a large network to start with, right? Because that process of kind of losing friends as time goes on. That just happens. And there are ways to stop that from happening for sure. But I think it's really important to like just be getting to know as many people as possible in your 20s, right? To just have this like wide array of people who will be future colleagues, who will help you find jobs in the future, who will be your close friends in the years to come. It's been hard this year because we haven't had the opportunity to connect with people on the fly, you know, through our jobs, through different things. I think that is going to be, that's a problem, right? And so I think anything that we can be doing now, if you're in your 20s, to broaden your social circle. And so that means, you know, I know it's really frustrating trying to have relationships on Zoom and, you know, in this kind of socially distant way, but throw yourself into it. You know, if there are networking events you can go to, if there are apps like House Party, right, where you can connect with your friends' friends and so on. All of these are great things that we can be trying to throw ourselves into during this time, because I think social relationships are really important in our 20s, and we should be just trying as hard as possible to make the best of the technology that we have right now.
Sure. And that reminds me of the part of the book that talks about hobbies, and you might go into that a little bit, but it's interesting that I've never thought about this, but that our natural relationships kind of occur through our hobbies or through our daily interactions. And now that this is so different, like you mentioned, how can we kind of go about finding our hobbies and finding our interests? Like, say if I loved rock climbing and that's indoors, and now I can't do that anymore. How do we navigate this? And is it okay to just try things that maybe you know, are not interested in at all? And maybe you might find interest now that it's somehow different circumstances. Like, how do we kind of create this natural way of finding and navigating through our 20s and 30s?
That's a really good question. And I'm really glad that you brought up this thing about how, you know, part of why it's so hard having these relationships on Zoom is because, you know, there's all of this psychological research, which I go into in the friendship chapter of this book, which says that, you know, the way that we form relationships is through casual, you know, kind of relaxed interactions, right? We don't generally make friends by sitting and talking to them for 30 minutes at a time, right? Really the way that we make friends is through, you know, maybe like meeting them, you know, sitting next to them in a class week after week after week, and just developing a sense of comfort with them that leads to something deeper. Or, you know, going to a class or pursuing a hobby where over time you kind of build that kind of relationship. So just to that point, what I would say is that it can be really awful, kind of like setting a date with somebody on FaceTime and sitting and talking. And generally, I think that the better way to do that is if maybe you and your friend could be doing an activity together, whether that's like watching a movie together like you would do in real life, or cooking a meal together with Zoom on in the background. That's a far more natural way to do things. Then shifting to the hobbies question, I loved writing about hobbies in this book because I had never really thought about them. In my 20s, hobbies were the last thing on my mind. I was far more focused on my career and trying to sort out my relationships. Hobbies were just like, seemed so frivolous. But all of the research in the book suggests that actually hobbies have a much bigger role to play in our lives than I think most of us realize. Hobbies are an important way to sort of keep our minds active over time, to pursue all of these different passions that we have that we can't pursue through our work and through you know, our relationships with our families, right, which take up so much of our time. One of the things that I love most about hobbies is that you don't have to be good at them. You know, in our careers and even in our relationships, I feel like our culture is so focused on perfectionism, right? And we all want to be really great at our jobs, and we want to do really well in our relationships. But what's so wonderful about hobbies is that you can pursue them just because you love them, because you enjoy doing them. And it doesn't matter how good you are at them. You're just doing it because it makes you happy. And I think that kind of takes a lot of pressure away from it, from your, you know, from your life in general, that you can go, that there are some areas in your life where you don't have to be perfect. And I think that kind of infuses your whole life with a little bit of relaxation and a sense that the stakes are not always so high. That's the thing that I love about it. I've talked to so many people who are experts at hobbies, and there's so many other amazing benefits to hobbies. I think that actually the quarantine has been kind of an amazing time for hobbies, because we've had these pockets of time that are unusual, right? Like we're not, most of us are not commuting. There are just these weird pockets of times that we have now where we could use that time productively to do things. So here's the thing about hobbies. Hobbies tend to be things that that basically involve a skill and that keep your mind active, right? So while I wish that chocolate eating could be a hobby, according to hobbies researchers, like that doesn't really require like the level of skill that we would count for a hobby. Or there's so many things, or like TV watching is not necessarily going to be a hobby, right? Because it doesn't require that level of intellectual engagement. The thing that keeps a hobby so fascinating is that you're intellectually engaged by it, and over time you kind of want to keep getting better at it. So things like picking up a musical instrument, or maybe like doing some sort of creative activity like painting or writing poetry, or in my case, the thing that I've been doing during the quarantine has been knitting. And I knitted the sweater, for instance. I learned how to knit. And
wow.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I would have never thought. It looks like something you could buy at the store.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And
Impressive.
I learned how to knit starting in April. So this has been cool. It's been a fun activity for me. So if you're looking for a hobby during this pandemic, I definitely recommend that you stay safe. There's you want to do something that you can do in a safe place, and that allows you to feel comfortable while you're doing it, right? But if you're thinking about what you can do, think about things that make you happy, that are an extension of your personality, and that also keeps you challenged, because that's part of the joy of the hobby, right? It's that once I figured out how to make the basic stitches that would go into a scarf, I had a new challenge, and so on and so forth. And I felt really proud that I was pushing myself to each new level, right? And there's even more things that I could make after this, right? And so that's part of it. It could be like running, or doing something that is like, working towards a marathon, or, learning new chord progressions on a musical instrument. Really anything that makes you happy, but that keeps you challenged. That's a great hobby. And there's so many to choose from. And as you said right at the start of the question, a great thing about hobbies is that it has a way of connecting you to other people, even if the act is solitary. So for me, I knit while, watching TV or just by myself, right? There are all these communities online that I've discovered of other knitters, or friends at my office who love knitting. And it's been a new bond and a new source of conversation for us. So, it's a great way to meet people even during this weird socially distant time.
Sure. And I was going to add that I even picked up crocheting earlier this year around the
Woo!
same time. So it was something I never thought I'd do, but it was very relaxing, and I really enjoyed it.
Totally. It's during this very stressful time. That's the other thing about hobbies, right? They're a great form of stress relief. And I think when we've all been so anxious, having something that is like a release valve is so valuable.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to quickly move on to my next question, because I know that we have a time limit. But the next question is on social media. And social media can be an important tool for staying connected. But in reflecting, I've noticed that I spend plenty of time on social, but I don't really feel like I'm doing it with intention, or maybe I'm not getting much out of it. And so I'm curious to know, how do you advise using social media in a time where we can be intentional? We do have time to plan it out and deepen our connections. And how can we use it to continue to navigate the life we want and the topics that we care about?
I think this is so interesting, because I think that one difference between millennials and Gen Z, so your generation, is that for millennials, all of this technology was new. And so Facebook came out when I was in college, and Instagram happened after that. And it really sort of absorbed us, right? It absorbed society as a whole. But for those of us who were kind of first encountering this technology, I think that we had a way of sort of throwing ourselves into it and not really having a lot of self-consciousness about it, and realizing exactly how inauthentic these platforms are, right? Like there's all of this work that we put into trying to create this image that we reveal to the world. And I think that while we were in the process of doing all of that, we didn't really think that much about how superficial it is, and how this is really just about branding in a lot of ways. The hope that I have for Gen Z is that, for you guys, you grew up with this technology, you were skeptical about it, I think, from the start, right? And I think that produced a lot of changes in the social media landscape. There was a lot more preference for ephemeral types of social media. So like stories, for instance, was a product that was kind of spurred by younger generations who didn't want things that were going to last forever, because they felt that they could be more authentic, right, when they were interacting in something that would just disappear. So Snapchat and all of the stories were part of that. But then, in general, I think that there's been kind of a push towards being more authentic. I think Gen Z cares more about influencers that reveal something about their real self, right? And they're not super curated. I think that that's slowly happening, and I think that is a really good thing, right? So in terms of the advice, I think that trend of just being really skeptical about social media and realizing that it is very much just it's a form of self-expression, but it's just expressing one very small part of who you are. I think that just being aware of that and realizing that there is so much that is just a little bit fake, right, on social media, because it's not telling the whole story. I think just having that awareness is really important, and realizing that we're all sort of playing this game where we're putting out a small part of who we are, but not all of who we are. I think that is really important. But the second thing is that, I think that we have to think about these as tools, right? I think for a long time, millennials just like kind of threw ourselves into it, and we thought that we were living a world, a kind of life on these platforms and interacting with people. I think that the way that we really need to be thinking about it is that it's just something that we can rely on, like a phone or like texting, to achieve something that we want. And so what do we want to do during this time? We want to deepen our existing social relationships and continue to expand our network of friends. So I think social media could be a really great place to expand our social network at a time where we can't interact with people. In my case, there have been like various like knitting groups that I've joined. I've had an opportunity to I've seen like a friend of mine who I didn't really know that well, who's doing something really cool during this time. And I've just like reached out to this person and said, hey, like this is really cool. Do you want to maybe do a phone call sometime and just chat more about this thing that I'm very interested in? It can be a way for you to develop your relationships and make new ones during this time. I think as long as we're like being super skeptical about these platforms, we can really use them to help us during this time.
Thank you. That was such good input. And I think you're right about this kind of evolution of wanting to see more authenticity and wanting to see people kind of, you don't have to expose your whole self and everything that you think and everything that you see as part of your life. But I think thinking about it in a way where, well, what is important to me? What is something that I do feel like everyone should know or think about? And reaching out to people and not being afraid to, I guess, comment on someone's page that you find interest in, and starting those real conversations offline or
Totally.
in a more real way.
Absolutely.
I thank you for the time that you've spent with us this morning. And with that, I'll end the interview. 2020 is, we want to think that it's been so unique to our generation, right? But there is so much value to be taken from it and so much to learn from. And it's something that will catapult you if you're able to take the time and really reflect on it. And some people may really be going through grief and feelings of sadness, and it's important to recognize those, like you mentioned earlier in the interview, and reach out to people. Don't be afraid to have those hard conversations with others. If you're in a place where maybe reflecting seems kind of difficult, even at this point, don't be afraid to talk to someone about that. And we strongly encourage that everyone just be authentic with their feelings and where they are in life, and that there is hope and there is something to be taken from this, and there is value and something to learn from this experience. So thank you, Elizabeth, for this morning, and thank you, Fair Trade Campaigns, for allowing this opportunity. And with that, I will end the interview.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's so true that it's a difficult year. So allow yourself to grieve and give yourself the space to process it all. But if there are things that you've learned this year, don't let those amazing insights go to waste, because they can propel you into the future that you really want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.